Are you ready for an invitation to experience life in a more liberated way? If you like to hear people's stories and be encouraged of the way God is working in their life, well, you have found a home here at the Parable Podcast. Hey there, I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and joining me today is artist and author Bette Dickinson, who encourages us to lean into the art of winemaking.
Vine dressers don't pay much attention to the fruit. They pay attention to the health, the quality, and the vitality of the vine. And if you pay attention to those things, fruit will naturally be the byproduct or sort of overflow of that. When Jesus talked about fruit, it was from a very different mindset. So you don't need to strive for the fruit. You can trust that if you're doing the work of abiding, if you're surrendering to good cultivation, if you're letting go of the season and, yielding to the seasons of the vine.
Here's my conversation with Bette Dickinson. Well, you may remember Bette Dickinson from episode 55, if you're following along numerically. She is an author and artist, and she was talking about her book about Advent a while ago, but she has a new book in store for us today, and we're going to hear all about it. Bette, welcome to the Parable Podcast.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's such a gift to be with you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you too. So you have launched into the world another new baby. It is called The Art of Vinemaking. And when I went back to listen to your previous episode, I was just like, oh my gosh, this quote, like you already knew this was happening. You had said, promises take time to ripen. And I was like, wow, that really just beautifully translates into the vine. And so I'm so excited to learn more about what kind of created this within you. But I do have a couple questions to kind of get us started before we jump into the parable. I'd love to know, what is one of the most favorite things about the relationships within your own family?
Wow, that was a really off-the-wall question. I did not expect that. Favorite thing about the relationships with my family, like my immediate family?
Yeah, it can be immediate or extended.
So my boys are 7 and 9, which are great ages. And one of the things I was thinking about this morning was the gift I think our family has that I love the most is we are cuddlers. And so I, every morning, get my 7 and 9-year-old on either side of me. They come in bed with me in the morning. And it is just the best part of my day and the best part of waking up. And also my husband's a cuddler too. So we're just a cuddling family. And I've found, and I've actually learned, I talked to actually one of my sons about this because I'm like, it's really important that we spend this time cuddling skin to skin because it releases oxytocin, which is a hormone in your brain that is actually really good for connection, and it's really good for just your joy levels throughout the day. So when they try to squirm away, I just tell them, well, actually, this is really good for your brain. So come back here. Yeah. Cuddle with me. That's so the thing that comes off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, that's really good. That reminds me, I would say my husband and both of our kids are super cuddlers. We lay in bed with them every single night before bed, and they're now 15 and 12.
Oh, is so good news. I was like, I hope this never ends because
they are very affectionate people. And so I would say I like to cuddle as well, but I do have a kind of I'm good. I'm ready to go into my own bed.
Yeah.
They're just in there for hours.
Exactly.
But I do appreciate that because you can see that sweetness resonate within them as they meet other people. I love that. Bette, what would you say is the best mistake that you've ever made?
Ooh. Well, every time I am working on a new creative painting or, a piece, there's often mistakes that come. And actually, I forget what that one painter that says there's no accident, mistakes. They're just happy accidents.
Yes.
Yes. And I find that a lot in my paintings that I will make a mistake and then it ends up being the best part of the piece.
Yeah.
So actually one time I got so frustrated with the piece that I started sanding it. And it was actually a piece that I had set aside for years.
Wow.
Years. Didn't do anything with it. And it was just I hate this piece. So what's going to happen if I sand it down? And something about what it exposed that was under there the whole time and the texture that it created was the best.
Wow.
So I'm always expectant when I'm creating a piece, especially when it's in what's called what I call the ugly phase. That it's like, there's just no, this I just want to throw it against the wall. I'm always like, okay, well, what's going to happen? Because I don't understand yet where this piece is going to go. But usually those are my very favorite pieces, are the ones that feel like they're a mistake.
Do you always keep everything? Because you said you had that for years. When is it the decision of like, okay, we'll just see what happens with this later? Or like, okay, it's time to clear out this room?
I never throw any pieces away.
Okay.
Mostly because I find that happens more often than not. And if I'm patient enough. Now, I have stacks and stacks of clay boards in my art studio that I haven't even seen in years. So it just depends. And I think sometimes it's a spirit-led prompting that's like, this one was set aside for years, but now it's time to pick it up again. And actually, I talk about that in my book. There was a particular piece that I'd started in 2020 called New Wine. And set it aside because I was just like, I don't know what to do with this. And then it was a later point where it often is something going on in my own soul that I need the piece for me, that then it's just prompting to pick it back up.
Now, I know you're probably only in your early 20s. So what has been the biggest change you've experienced in your life?
Well, that was very sweet, Danielle. I am not in my early 20s.
Neither am I.
I am almost 40, friends. So, okay, biggest change I've ever experienced in my life? Ooh, I would probably say becoming a mom. I just watched this Instagram reel the other day that was like, it takes 5 years after you become a mom to relearn a whole new identity. Not only does your body change, obviously, but just your soul changes, your pace of life changes. The way you think about things change. You are no longer the center of gravity in your own world. And so definitely becoming a mom, both times.
That's so good. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Bette, for listeners who haven't listened to episode 55, could you share a little bit of like what art has looked like in your life? Have you always been an artist and also an author? Or is this something that has happened within the last couple of years?
Ever since I can remember, I loved to paint. And actually, my Uncle Matt, who just passed away, he taught me a love of creating. And so he just passed a couple weeks ago, and that's really brought up, again, a gratitude for him teaching me how to be an artist and to listen to that voice within. But actually, I got away from that for a long time when I was in ministry. Interestingly enough, the book, The Art of Vinemaking, is really a lot about my story of returning to that. So it's really only been over the last 5 to 6 years that I would say, God has led me on a journey of recovering my artist soul and listening to the true self within amidst the pressure to be somebody else, right? Because I think I'm an Enneagram 3, which is an achiever. If you know much about the Enneagram, we tend to shapeshift into whatever environment is needed. And in ministry, I was never asked to be an artist. I was asked to be, administrative, to be a leader, to get things done, to be a pastor. But it really took God really making some major sort of life-altering shifts in my life for me to say, actually, no, this is the primary call on my life, and I need to stay faithful to that. And that's been the journey I've been on over the last 5 to 6 years. Owning that voice and moving forward in faith that He would make a way for me to do this as a career.
That's beautiful that you said recovering your artist soul and also the shape-shifting thing. I never put words to that, but I'm also a person who, I can't remember if it's not Strength Finders, but it's an enabler, not in a bad way, but like whatever somebody else needs, like I will be there for them. So I totally resonate with that. Bette, as we dive into what your book is, I know that you have a parable story that kind of launches the theme of this book. So I'd love for you to share with us what that is today.
So I guess kind of, even the story, like I said, of recovering my artist soul began when it was 2019. I was just beginning to re-tap into the artist part of myself. I knew that this is something I needed to actually make more central to my life. And so I was working with a ministry at the time that had commissioned me to do a painting on the pruned vine and to do a written piece, which was like the first time I felt, one of the first times that I felt like, oh, well, this is actually an invitation to use my art. And yet I also had just been in this place in my life where I was sort of torn between those two parts of myself, sort of this ministry side that most of the time I was having to kind of lead and activate and make things happen. And I was actually leading an event, a fall conference that was coming up just a couple days later, when I met my good friend now, Dave Boss, who's a vine dresser. And I met with him because as I was wanting to work on this painting and a written piece about the pruned vine in John 15, I love that passage in scripture. I know so many people love the passage. I am the vine, you are the branches. You know, if you abide in me, you will bear much fruit. And talking about the vine dresser. But I really wanted to know what does a vine dresser actually do? You know, how does this work? We're so disconnected from the land and vine dressing that I was like, I know there's deeper levels to this, that if I was just able to talk to a vine dresser and actually get to see some of the vines and study them, maybe I would be able to uncover some of the meaning that would have been obvious to the hearers in Jesus's day in a Gregorian society. So I met with Dave in a vineyard and here in Traverse City, which is where I live, Traverse City, Michigan. And I asked him, so what do vine dressers pay attention to when tending vines? And what he said next began to be a complete shift in how I view the spiritual life. And he just said it in this offhanded comment. He said, well, actually, vine dressers don't pay much attention to the fruit. They pay attention to the health, the quality, and the vitality of the vine. And if you pay attention to those things, fruit will naturally be the byproduct or sort of overflow of that, which, Danielle, I don't know in the context that you're in, but that to me was like, wait, what? What? You mean to tell me that, you know, because when I hear the word fruit in a ministry culture, in Western mindset, it is numbers. It's the things that we're always aiming for. It's the outputs. And to hear someone say, actually, that's not the focus. That's not to say that vine dressers don't care about fruit. Obviously, they do, you know, and Dave cultivates vines so that they will yield fruit. But when Jesus talked about fruit, it was from a very different mindset. He talked about the process, the relational process between the vine and the branches, and then the branches and the vine dresser. That's this relational, intertwined, interconnected thing that then, if you cultivate health in that relationship, fruit will be the natural overflow. So you don't need to strive for the fruit. You can trust that if you're doing the work of abiding, if you're surrendering to good cultivation, if you're letting go of the season and, you know, yielding to the seasons of the vine, which is another piece that I was really learning, is that harvest is just a couple weeks in reality when you have fruit on the vine. Most of the year it's in dormancy, it's pruning, it's growing, it's, you know, bud break, flowering. I mean, all those months leading up to it go into that long process, that it's not just about the end result. And that really sent me into a long personal journey where I basically became a vine dresser apprentice and sort of shadowed my friend Dave in every season of the vine, taking pictures, writing notes, listening to him describe what he does. And I found that actually was the kind of thing that I needed to learn for myself in my own spiritual life that unlocked a lot of things for me.
Wow. That's super helpful to me, a part about the fruit. My husband, Eric, and we went to Sonoma before we had kids. So it was quite a while ago. I don't know what I thought. Like, I just always assumed that vines were always going to be flowing. Grapes were going to be everywhere. And we got there in April and there was nothing. It was just like these like sticks coming out of the ground. And I'm like, huh. So I think that is such a beautiful picture, because sometimes for visual learners, we need that understanding of, okay, here is like the roots and the vine is that needs to be tended to and need to be aware of. You know, you talked about in your book a little bit about burnout and it was happening. How was that present for you in your life? And then how has that adjusted and changed with this idea of the vine?
You know, in the introduction to the book, and in that moment when I met with Dave in the vineyard, I immediately was it was like cognitive dissonance is maybe the best way to describe it, of what he was saying, and then my lived experience in ministry. Because at the time, I was working for a ministry, and several years our performance was based on like our performance review, where we're actually sort of evaluated as whether or not we're good ministry leaders, was intimately connected to our numbers. So our annual performance, which was the number of students involved, the number of people who came to faith, the number of small groups. And there was a time where we had a lot of really unexpected situations that were outside of our control, where students were struggling with depression or burnout themselves, or just going through difficult things. And the size of the ministry began to shrink. And yet sort of the conversation didn't revolve at all around how are these leaders doing? How are you doing as a leader? How can we make sure that you all are healthy and connected to Jesus? The conversation was around, why are the numbers going down? And what can we do better next year to make sure that we are on a growth trajectory? And when you live in that mindset, and it's a fear-based mindset, right? Really, because if you're evaluated by your outputs, then you're always striving for an output, whether or not your circumstances or season allows for that kind of numerical growth. And it's not to say that numerical growth is bad, or even looking at, the numbers are bad. But I think what I began to experience in ministry was that everything was about the outputs, which just puts you in a mindset of striving, of, working hard to make things happen, even if that kind of growth is outside of your control in a lot of ways. I mean, you could try a lot of things and still not see growth. You could work really, really hard and still not see growth. And so it was a time in my life where I just felt like I can't keep going at this pace. I can't keep going with this mindset. And I also had this real strong conviction around the students I was leading, and feeling like if I'm constantly looking at them, my student leaders, for example, as a means to an end, right? Like, you are the means through which we're going to grow these small groups. You're the means through which we're going to increase our numbers of students involved. Like, that's gross. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's really gross to see them that way, as opposed to beloved, as opposed to how can we make sure that you are healthy and whole and thriving and connected to Jesus, and trusting that the overflow of that would be the kind of community that would welcome all different kinds of people that, and so there was a lot going on for me in that time. But I think that burnout for me was feeling like a machine, treated like a machine. And then because I was treated like a machine, treating others like a machine. And it was exploitative.
Absolutely. I was just listening to a podcast by Jess Connolly, and it was specifically on burnout, like how to know, and then also how to put limitations, because just like you were talking about, like motherhood, there's like a season of 5 years. Burnout takes a long time to recover from, physically, mentally, spiritually, and also just to kind of alert yourself of like, oh, this is a point where maybe I don't want to give myself into this. Because you said this was kind of like a machine, what would be some of your tips or navigating tools of like, okay, now that I've recognized that burnout is happening in my life, here's how I can scale back and readjust according to your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a big part of the learning was recognizing this sort of seasonal, cyclical cycle that is embedded through all of creation, but also embedded through Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, and that it flows in that order. And actually, so the last three parts of my book go through, what does it look like to abide in the death of Christ? And that would be, I suppose, where we recognize burnout is happening. Yeah. Which I'll come back to. The second part is, how do we abide in the resurrection of Christ? And then how do we abide in the life of Christ? And the death of Christ is seasons of sort of post-harvest. After harvest, you gather in the harvest. One of the fascinating things about that season that I learned is that at the end of post-harvest, vines take all the remaining energy. Now that the grapes are off to the winery, they take all the remaining energy they can soak up from those leaves. And whatever energy is soaked up at that point is channeled down into the roots. Yeah. And it's stored into the roots for dormancy. And there's this shift from fruits to roots. And I think we don't know how to make that shift in our world because we're constantly, well, it's fruit, and then it's fruit, and then it's fruit, and then it's fruit, and then it's fruit. And that's how burnout happens. And so I think for a lot of us, we need to then say, okay, I just had an intense season. So for me right now, right, launching the book, got a retreat, got lots of things rolling out. It's harvest season. I know that come late October, November, December, January, I need to slow down and I need to clear my calendar. I need to come back to myself, come back to God, come back to sort of a withdrawing from the public eye and slowing down into silence, solitude, stillness, and rest so that I can tend to the roots and so that I can return to who am I again? Return to my belovedness apart from the fruit. And that was a huge thing for me that I learned, over sabbatical, which is kind of when this whole season started for me. I met Dave just before I went into the sabbatical of recognizing, when the fruit is gone and I'm no longer putting my identity and it's not connected at all to anything I'm producing, who am I?
Yeah.
Is my identity connected to what I'm creating or producing or people's response to it or how many likes or shares or how many books are sold or whatever those metrics that our world tends to say is an evaluation metric on who we are? When I can set all of those things aside and return sort of bare branches, no fruit on the vine, I am still connected to the vine. Yeah. And that is the most important thing about me. And so it's then taking a time to withdraw into my roots, to remember, recover my belovedness, to do things that I love, to rest, to dream again, to create again without an agenda, without a product or a project that I'm working on, and to play, to rest, to play. And then it's sort of those seasons, I'm realizing they don't have a set timeline for them. Sometimes, some of us, if we've been in burnout, especially a hardcore burnout, we may need years of that time of dormancy. And actually, this was the fascinating thing that I learned from my friend Dave is that so in the spring, when vines are pruned after dormancy, they prune the vines, at least Dave does, right after the sap flows back into the vines, and he prunes them, and he assesses each vine based on its level of health. And so if in the past season, the branches didn't grow all the way up to the wire trellis, he will cut back half of the vines and remove half of the fruit for that year.
Yeah.
If it's only grown hasn't grown hardly at all, he'll remove all of the fruit that year, all of the fruit, or at least the potential of fruit. He'll take off all the branches that could potentially yield fruit. And even if it tries to yield fruit, he'll take it off because he knows that vine is not healthy and he wants it to focus its energy on healing and on the roots. And so there's sometimes even when a pruning growth season comes again, we may still be in a season of healing and growth. And I just don't think our world has a framework for that at all. No. And that it's seasons like that. And then sort of the waiting is, okay, it's a in-tuneness to the Spirit of God, and it's attuneness to where we are and whether or not we're healthy. And a lot of times we think we're ready for spring to come. We think we're ready to grow again and to bear fruit again. And God's like, nope, you have a longer winter or you have another year of abiding in me where you're growing and just focusing on healing before fruit begins to show itself. So that's what I would say for people who are in burnout. Take a look at how the vines operate in post-harvest and dormancy and pruning. And even pruning itself is an act of surrender to not overproducing. Yeah. Right. Because Dave's, he'll prune 90% of what's on the vine. 90%, that's pretty drastic, but it's choosing to focus on quality as opposed to quantity. Yeah. And that if you focus on quantity, you're going to burn the vine out and you're not going to be able to create quality fruit.
I love watching how do they do that? How do they make something? I'd love to just know, okay, there's a reason and a purpose behind everything. So that is fantastic that you were able to really get in there and understand at all different seasons. I think also what our culture does too is when people talk about rest, we are also following other people's rhythms rather than ourselves. I was like, oh, well, they took a sabbatical for this long, or they they only rested just for the weekend. So there's like this weird imbalance because everybody's different. We all have different baggage, life experiences, and things that we're trying to heal through. And that lens can look differently. So I think that's helpful for us as the listener to understand that as well. Bette, you talked about this like urgency and performance. Is there a way, like even after you've had time to rest, that you've had to like, oh, you can just now like recognize, okay, I need to scale back from that? How is that played out when you kind of feel that need or desire to perform or to keep going? And now that you have these rhythms in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think having a spiritual director is very helpful in things like this, because I might not be able to recognize it in myself, or other people speaking into that. I think I've just been through this rhythm enough times now that I know, I am on the verge of burnout, because I think one indicator for me is if I haven't had room in my schedule to paint, that's a problem, because that is where I return to rest and play and joy and abiding and attachment with Jesus for me. And so I think what's beautiful, at least and I think everybody needs to find their own thing. It's not going to be the same for everybody, but finding something that is play for you, which is, Brené Brown talks about play is anything that allows us to tap into a flow state where we lose all self-consciousness and sort of lose track of time. And when we are able to get into a state of play where we lose self-consciousness, then we're no longer performing, right? Because it doesn't matter. It's about the process. And so for me, I think I've needed to make creating a discipline, because it helps me get back into that space of where it's about the process. It's about the play. It's about sort of recovering myself and connecting to Jesus that releases my hands on the control of making something happen. And so that's been a discipline that I've needed to do, but it might look like something different for everybody. Like it might be fishing, or it might be, playing basketball. So I think tapping into where we, if we haven't had margin in our life to do the things that we love, then that's a sign that maybe we're burning out or on the verge of burnout. And, putting those things on our calendar.
That's so good. Well, Bette, I've seen many times how you play, how you have silliness. I mean, just recently when you launched the book, they launched you into the water. And I think that is just like a gentle reminder that we all deserve play, that it doesn't stop at age 8. Like God invites us to have that humility and like tenderness and cuddling like our children. And so that is the liberating fact. If you could share, that piece of liberation and hope for the person who's reading The Art of Vinemaking, what would your hope be for them?
I think another thing that I long for that maybe I didn't mention, since you brought up the launch party, is that you would have a community where you are beloved. And that where you can fully belong and you can bring all parts of yourself. And I think that's also a discipline too, of making room for those relationships. And quite honestly, before I went to the Boundless Directors Retreat where they threw me into the water, I was pushing really hard. And I knew like I need to be with my people because I can't survive this alone. And so I think my hope would be, one, that you give yourself permission to slow down, to withdraw, to trust the process of dormancy and post-harvest. The culture is not going to reward it, so you have to choose it. And you have to be disciplined to put it in your schedule, but to trust that there are things that God does in us in the roots that are vital for the harvest season in the future. And so my hope would be people could trust in that slowing down a process, but also that they could surrender themselves to a beloved community where they are seen and soothed and safe and secure, and can then open their truest selves, where they can show up in their full selves and be received in all their beautiful glory. Because it's those relationships that then when we, especially coming out of a season of dormancy, that then we find our place in the world where we can thrive and flourish and bear fruit for the kingdom.
So good, Bette. If you are interested in The Art of Vinemaking, I'm sure it is available everywhere, right, Bette?
Yeah.
We will have everything linked in the show notes, but you do have a cohort coming up. Mm-hmm. If people kind of really want to dive into this content a little bit more, what can they expect from that?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about in the book is that we actually, in terms of how we're being formed, we actually can't be transformed through just words.
Yeah.
We need embodied experiences and relational connection. And so I've created an online course series that goes through the book that offers embodied spiritual practices like audio guided walks or Visio Divina reflections on one of my paintings or breath prayers, that just help us implement the material into our bodies. So there's online course material, and you can find all this information at theartofvinemaking.com. But the cohorts are really special because, again, transformation happens in community. So this cohort, it starts October 27th, the one I'm launching in the fall. And it's people all over the world are going to be on these calls just once a week, going through the material, debriefing together, praying for one another to go on this journey together. Because we weren't designed to go at it alone. And I'm really excited about those. And so if you want to be a part of that, check out theartofvinemaking.com and would love to have you join us for that.
Yeah, check it out. Again, everything is in today's show notes. Bette, thank you so much for this gentle reminder and the whole overview of the vine. It's really given us some food for thought. So I appreciate your parable story and you joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I don't know about you, but I took so many things away from Bette's words today. I could just picture the vine in my head, but also just some of the words she uses helps me reframe some of my own thoughts. If you want to connect with Bette, grab the Art of Vinemaking or join her cohort, simply visit daniellezapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Bette. Number 1, what are the areas in my life that currently feel urgent, or maybe it's about your own performance? And number 2, what is one way you can go from fruits to roots and dwell on your relationship with God in that interconnectedness? If Bette's story really resonated with you, could you do me a favor and share this with a friend who maybe is going through a season of burnout, feeling like they always have to have it together, or just plain overwhelmed? This episode was edited by my husband, Eric Zapchenk, and we hope that you were encouraged to think about your own story. Remember, your parable showcases how we step into the rhythms and the seasons of the vine. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.